Hey everybody, welcome to Crazy Tech Lab, and we have a beautiful brand new Mini-ITX motherboard to look at here today on the channel, and it is the MSI MPG B850I Edge TI Wi-Fi. So this is one of 4 Mini-ITX motherboards that MSI now has for the mainstream and high-end chipsets for Intel and AMD. So we've got B860, we've got B850, that's the one that we've got here. We also have Z890 and also X870. So you can see my little roundup of all of MSI's Mini-ITX motherboards, or at least 3 of them, the ones that I saw at Computex recently. And it's great seeing the company go all out with Mini-ITX support this time. So other manufacturers have done it. I don't think MSI has actually had the full range yet of 2 each for for AMD and Intel at the same time. So very, very excited to see how this board performs, and also to look at the other motherboards as well. So there's a bit of a delay on getting the X870 version, still waiting on the Z890, and obviously B860 we do actually have here in the lab, and we're going to be checking that out very, very soon. So in terms of price, we have a price of $250 in the US, a little bit less here in pounds in the UK. Reasonably priced then compared to the competition, which is mainly from ASUS and Gigabyte, but we do have some other options from ASRock as well. They're a little bit cheaper, slightly fewer features, that kind of thing. We have features on this board that are basically very current. So we've got Wi-Fi 7, we have PCI Express 5 on the PCI Express slot, and also on one of the M.2 ports. There are 2 M.2 ports on this motherboard. One just below the heatsink here, which is fan assisted, so that's going to be an interesting thing to look at later. Is that a negative point or a positive point on this board? Because I know that any fans on Mini-ITX kind of, makes a lot of people out there shudder, because we have had some pretty noisy chipset and M.2 fans in the past. The second slot is on the rear of the PCB like normal. Now, something that really sets the X870 and Z890 versions of this board apart are that they have 3 and 4 M.2 ports. Now, 3 M.2 ports on a Mini-ITX motherboard is rare enough. Like, there haven't been probably more than 3 Mini-ITX motherboards that have had that configuration. I think the Gigabyte B850 Ultra or X870, not X870, X670, but I'm pretty sure there was a Gigabyte board last generation for AMD that had 3 M.2 slots, and of course the infamous ASRock X299E ITX AC. I know that because I had one of those, and I did populate it with 3 SSDs. So 3 is really, really rare. So I'm really looking forward to using the MSI X870 probably in my own system. That's going to be an upgrade. I'm on an Intel 14th gen CPU at the moment in my current rig, and probably going to switch to that one unless I fancy going with Arrow Lake, because that motherboard has 4 M.2 ports, which is insane. But I kind of love having more than 2 M.2 ports, because it means that you don't have to spend an absolute fortune getting an 8TB SSD, for example. If you go for 2 4s, that's going to work out cheaper. Similarly, if you go for 2 2TB SSDs, that is probably going to work out cheaper, especially if you're going for the faster ones, than a 4TB model. So that's why I like having multiple M.2 ports. And SSDs are kind of borderline cheap enough now to just kind of get rid of all of the other storage in your PC and just stick to M.2, and that will save you a whole bunch of cable tidying as well. So we'll be looking at the features on this board, checking out the temperatures, comparing those features to the other competition as well, because that's super important, because there isn't that much out there, but there's quite a bit in this board's price range, and then coming to some conclusions at the end. So thanks to MSI for sending over this motherboard today. Let's crack on with the review, but not first before I ask you to please subscribe to my channel. It means a lot to have your support, and also don't forget to like and comment on this video as well. Just helps punch me through the algorithm and gets me noticed. Also, this board and a whole bunch of other stuff you can see buy links to down in the description down below. The best deals for this motherboard and all the other hardware that you might be interested in can be found in my Amazon shop as well. So links down below, check those out. And if you really like this review today, you can always send me your thanks using the thanks button down below, or even buy me a coffee. So that's it for the intro. Let's check out the MPG B850i Edge TI Wi-Fi. Right, so we're going to do a quick unboxing now and see what we actually get in here, and also have a quick hands-on with the motherboard and check out some of the features in person. So let's see what we got. I'm going to put the motherboard to one side for a moment so we can just check out the accessories. You just get the usual paraphernalia here, and a quick installation guide, some stickers for your case and cables and all that kind of stuff. I would imagine most of the time they probably stay in the box. Accessory wise, I'm pretty sure that's it. That is definitely it in the box. So not a whole load of things to sort of write home about here, but there were a couple of very useful things for Mini-ITX owners. So first and foremost, these two things are extension cables. So first of all, we have an extension cable for the front panel. Now this might seem like a bit of a strange inclusion, but it's actually really useful in a Mini-ITX build, because the front panel is often buried down in the corner, the depths of some very small, very cramped case. And I can speak from personal experience, there's been a lot of times where I would have killed for one of these, because if you actually accidentally dislodge one of the cables, trying to install a fan or install an SSD or something, having a slightly sort of extended cable and the connector obviously on the end for your actual cables running off to the case just makes things a lot easier. So a great addition to this motherboard here. Another extension cable we have is for 3-pin RGB connectors. So we've got a I believe that's a Corsair connector or something there. It's just got the kind of the square shaped connector running off the 3-pin, which I think you can see there. So that is compatible with some but not all RGB connectors. However, probably the best addition here, and I don't know why they didn't include this with the B860 model either, they certainly include it with the other ones, is the EasyCon fan connector. Now, if we have a look on the motherboard very quickly, you will see that there's a little connector down here. And this is basically a fan header, RGB header, and what else have we got? Is it just those two on this one? I always forget. No, it's USB as well, isn't it? So I know there's a couple of different variations, but this is sort of the one where you get all three. So this port here basically splits out using that cable into an extra fan header. So that increases the number of fan headers on this board from 3 to 4, I believe. I'm just double checking my counting up here. Yep, so definitely 3. We've got that one there, one down there, buried next to the M.2 heatsink. So this one splits out to give a 4th. So 4 fan headers on a Mini-ITX board is pretty rare. And it also doubles up the RGB headers. So 3-pin RGB, we've got one down there. You get another one thanks to this cable, and a USB 2 header as well. So you get one more of those. There's another one just over to the north of the heatsink down there. So that's really, really cool. And obviously this thing is extended as well, so you can just run it round through the cable routing hole next to your motherboard or something like that. And then as you can see, it just kind of splits off into 3 connectors. So a really, really cool addition with the EasyCon connector there. You also get a single SATA cable. You might have a hard disk that you want to transplant. There are 2 ports on the motherboard that you can see down here. So that's all you get on this motherboard. Occasionally you would get 4. I can't remember if any of the current generation has 4, maybe ASRock does or something, but in general, you kind of want to stick to M.2 with your Mini-ITX system, just because it saves on a whole bunch of cables and other components. And you might want to remove those other components as well, just to improve airflow and those kind of things. We also get a pretty large and white, by the looks of things, antenna for the onboard 802 or Wi-Fi 7, basically. And this is magnetic, or it's got rubber mounts, so you can kind of sit it on your desk. And you also have the quick connect Wi-Fi fittings there. So these don't screw on, they just push on. You can see the connectors around here are just like the push-on fittings, but they do have the normal screw, the thread behind them. So if you don't want to use that connector for some reason and you want to use a standard screw-on connector, you can still do that with these connectors. But obviously those things are really, really fiddly sometimes, especially if you're trying to do it behind a reaching around the back of the PC to connect them. I've spent many an hour trying and often failing to do that. These push-fit connectors are really, really easy. And ASUS and Gigabyte have similar things to that as well. So looking at the actual motherboard, nothing too sort of outrageous here apart from the M.2 fan, and that just kind of goes down and mainly actually cools the chipset heatsink beneath. So there's the chipset heatsink just kind of sits underneath, and the fan cools that, as well as the SSD that sits directly below it. So there's a portion of the SSD that isn't attached to a heatsink, which may or may not prove a problem. So I'm just going to have a quick look at the specifications on the box, because this is the first time I've actually looked at this board. And just trying to check what the Type C is for the front panel. So it looks like we have a 20 gigabits a second Type C port, because that one is, oh, that's actually 20 gigs as well. So maybe this one is just, the other one must be, let me just, yeah, so the other one is 10G. So there's only one on the back here, and that says it's 20. So that means the front panel port, because I'm just sticking to the PC for the moment, that is 10 gigabits a second. So you don't get any kind of enhanced power delivery or bandwidth or anything, so you're limited to 10 gigabits a second. So that won't be enough to power some of the super fast storage that we have out there at the moment, such as, if I just reach over and grab it, such as this bad boy here. So this needs 20 gigabits a second to reach its rated speed of 2100. You can see my review of this SSD in another video on the channel. And but still, you're going to get reasonable performance, so you're not going to be limited to just standard USB 3 speed. You will get about double that. So the heatsink, I'm just going to see if I can reach around and grab my screwdriver. And just going to use my screwdriver to remove this thing. And we can have a look underneath. So we can see that the fan connector down there is kind of a micro connector, like a proprietary thing for this motherboard. So you can't just detach this and use it for something else. But you can, if you wanted to, detach the fan. But we're going to see what happens if you do that later on. And you can see here that if you're using a standard length SSD, it's going to reach down to about there. So it means that there's this section here that isn't attached to the heatsink below, which is cooling the chipset underneath. And then also on the top, you don't have full-length coverage of your SSD either, but you do get active cooling thanks to the fan here. So I would just put that back on, and I am going to put that screw back in, because otherwise those things always get lost and they're impossible to replace. So just want to make sure that I don't lose those now. So just connect it up a little bit. So we have 8 teamed power stages along here, so it's a fairly basic power delivery, but a reasonably large heatsink. It's not very thick though. If you look down there, it's pretty hollow, so there's not a whole load of volume here. So you probably don't want to be overclocking a 9950X or something like that, but we'll see how it performs with one a little bit later. And other features on this board, I don't think there's too much we need to talk about on the top side. Audio, I believe, is Realtek. And I just want to double check whether what audio this actually is. So I'm pretty sure the audio is down here, and I think I've just read it's Realtek ALC 4080, so, or 4080. So that's a pretty decent codec for the audio down there. So sometimes you'll get boards that are at the lower end of the spectrum, and they'll drop down to something that's less favourable, such as Realtek ALC 897, which is pretty ancient now. So. Quick look around the back. Obviously not much to talk about here other than the second M.2 port, which is here, and that one is PCI Express 4 or below, so the top side is PCI Express 5, so you can drop a PCI Express 5 SSD in there if you want to. The rear panels, so we have USB BIOS flashback and a clear CMOS button, which is very, very handy, and nice to see that both of those are accessible. And HDMI, if you want to run the CPU onboard graphics, we also have 2 USB 3 ports, 2 USB 3.2 Gen 2 ports, which cap out at 10 gigabits. Those 2 red ones there. We get another one of those, a third one here, 20 gigabit Type C. And if I'm honest, I would probably rather have the 20 gig Type C on the front panel header, because I don't really want to be reaching around the back of the PC to connect my SSD. I want to be connecting it to the front panel. So just an idea, because otherwise it's like, you know, what are you going to be connecting to the rear of your PC? I mean, most people, it's going to be an SSD or something that you want to connect to a Type-C 20 gig port. So Wi-Fi is Wi-Fi 7, and the audio, as we mentioned earlier, Realtek ALC 4080, so you get an optical output, mic in and line out, so a fairly basic arrangement there. And that is pretty much it for the unboxing. So we're going to move on, do a system build, do a little bit of testing, and come to some conclusions at the end. The peak VRM temperature of 61 degrees C was reasonable, but you will probably see a fair bit lower on larger, more elaborate motherboards with bigger heatsinks. Still, this was with a Ryzen 9 9950X and not with the 9800X3D that we used in the system build. I dropped in the flagship processor to see what the board could do, and it fared pretty well. I wouldn't want to overclock that processor with it, especially not with a manual overclock, but with anything less, even with a bit of tweaking, you're probably going to be fine. The M.2 temperatures though were a lot more inconsistent, and in fact out of the box the Samsung 9100 Pro did get very close to throttling. It also did this with the fan in balanced mode, and also if you set the chipset temperature to control the fan and left everything else as it is. Also, just out of the box, the temperatures were way too hot for my liking. So the two things that really helped were either just setting the chipset temperature to be your control temperature, and then setting the chipset fan to 40% speed across the graph. That resulted in a temperature of 68 degrees C on the Samsung PCI Express 5 SSD, so miles away from any throttling zones. And then if you also set the chipset temperature to control the fan again, but set the fan mode to boost, then that resulted in a temperature just 2 degrees higher, so 70 degrees C. So definitely either switch the fan to boost mode or set it to 40% speed, as well as on both of those things, set the fan response to chipset controlled. And one thing I did notice is a bit of a problem on this motherboard is that the chipset fan is linked to the CPU temperature by default, and that poses a bit of a problem because it means that the chipset fan is going to ramp up every single time the CPU ramps up, which is not really what you need because the two generally aren't tied together. The chipset fan will generally need to activate when the M.2 SSD is getting hot or the chipset is getting hot, and usually those two things are linked together. The problem that we've got is that the chipset temperature doesn't really vary that much. So while you need to cool it, you also need to worry about your M.2 SSD, and of course there is no option here to select your M.2 SSD as the temperature. So what I would do is basically you have two options to solve this. You definitely don't want to leave it linked to the CPU temperature, because as soon as your CPU temperature goes high, for example in games, or if you're doing some content creation or something, the chipset fan will ramp up and quickly become audible. In fact, it does that above about 30 to 40% in the fan speed. So what I suggest you do is actually go to the temperature source select up here, select the chipset temperature as your input. You don't want to leave it here because the chipset temperature doesn't vary that much, as I say, and you kind of want a minimum fan speed to be able to deal with the M.2 ramping up, especially if you've got a PCI Express 5 SSD. Now, if you've got a PCI Express 4 SSD, you don't really need to worry about this. I would just either manually disable the chipset fan, set the fan speed to 0, or just unplug the cable on the motherboard. The chipset doesn't really get that hot, and you've still got the big heatsink on top of it as well. So alternatively, what you can just do is just set a chipset fan speed of 20% or something like that. Now, to set a manual fan speed, what you need to do is to select manual mode up here, up the top. And if you've got a PCI Express 4 SSD, what I would do is just kind of have it at the fan duty cycle, so it's 20%, and just do that. Do the same for all of the other points on the graph, because you just don't need it ramping up to that. So we're around 20% there, but you won't hear anything. Now, if you have a PCI Express 5 SSD, what you want to do is you definitely want the additional air cooling here. So what I found is, for my ears anyway, is setting a fan duty cycle of 40%. Now that to me was not audible above the rest of the system, but it gave enough airflow to provide cooling enough to keep the SSD from throttling, and also keep the chipset nice and cool as well. So this would be one option if you have a PCI Express 5 SSD. You might want to go slightly lower, or if your ears can bear it, you can go slightly higher on the fan speed. I wouldn't go too much lower than this, because that's when the the M.2 SSD temperature starts increasing. Now, the alternative, if you want to just click and set and forget kind of thing, is to go with boost mode. Now, boost mode here, as you can see, will maintain around 30%, or around 35. So 40 is up here, 30, so it's actually just below that, it's about 28, but it quickly ramps up to about the same level that we saw. So when I was throughout all my benchmarks, the chipset temperature kind of stayed in this area here. So this is another option. So the chipset temperature is not going to increase by more than above maybe sort of 60-65 degrees. So you're not going to see the full speed here, but it's just enough for you to set and forget, and to hopefully not have that horrible sound. So if you set the boost mode, make sure you set it to chipset as the temperature source. If everything works fine, that's great. If you're finding that chipset fan is spinning up to high enough speeds for it to be annoying, then what you need to do is to switch back to manual mode, and then just have it as we've got here. Set the fan line here, the fan curve, to just 40% all the way across. That for me was silent. I couldn't hear it above the noise of the rest of the system. It means the SSD is getting cooled, it means the chipset is getting cooled, but your ears aren't picking up the noise. So just a little bit of a tip there with the chipset fan. So what do we make of the MSI MPG B850I Edge Ti Wi-Fi then? Well, this board at around $250 is relatively well placed compared to the competition mainly being from ASUS and Gigabyte with their B850 motherboards. The equivalent ASRock is a fair bit cheaper, and as a result you do lop off a couple of features, but that board is still worth looking at as well. You can see links to all of these boards down in the description down below as well, by the way. And when it comes to those features, it really is tit for tat between the ASUS, MSI and the Gigabyte boards. Some have more features in one area, some more than in another. The MSI obviously has the advantage of having an actively cooled M.2 SSD and chipset, but the actual real world performance of that fan doesn't really add that much. And if you do allow it to run away with itself, which it will do out of the box, it's a little bit of at a disadvantage compared to the other boards, because that chipset fan does have a tendency to run away with itself under high CPU workloads, because of course that fan is linked to the CPU temperature, whereas it's not going to impact the CPU temperature at all. So What you need to do, absolutely, you need to switch the temperature input from the CPU to the chipset. So if the chipset does get toasty, then it will at least be responding for that. But make sure, if you're just skipping most of the video and coming to the conclusion, go back, have a look at the fan control section, and just double check on how to properly configure that chipset fan so it's not going to be noisy in your particular system. Other than that, we've got pretty much everything that we need here. We've got PCI Express 5 support on the GPU and M.2 SSD. If you think you need that, PCI Express 5 SSDs don't offer that much outside of sequential workloads, but they are coming down in price. I think I spotted the Samsung 9100 Pro that we used in the system build today. The 2TB version is available for less than 180 bucks, that's pretty cheap, and a heck of a lot cheaper than it was at launch as well. So prices are starting to come down. PCI Express 5 is starting to become mainstream, or just taking a few steps into being mainstream. So overall, it's a pretty good board. A lot will depend on the price and your manufacturer preference, those kind of things. Neither the Asus or the Gigabyte really offer any kind of killer features over and above the other one. MSI is also late to the party as well. So the Asus and Gigabyte versions of the B850 Mini-ITX motherboards have been out for quite some time. So it's maybe going to be a bit tricky for MSI to kind of punch in and get noticed. But hopefully the video here today is at least highlighting the fact that we have another kid on the block when it comes to B850 and Mini-ITX motherboards, and hopefully we're going to be looking at all of the other Mini-ITX motherboards from MSI as well, especially the X870 when it comes out, because AMD is outselling Intel boards quite significantly at the moment. So obviously the X870 board with its 3 M.2 ports is going to be the board that everybody is going to be looking at. So that's it from me today. Thanks a huge amount to MSI for sending over all the goodies that we've shown in today's video, and thanks a lot for you guys to watching as well. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel. It means a lot to have your support, and don't forget to comment and like on this video as well. Love hearing what you guys think of my videos, and liking and commenting, believe it or not, just helps punch me through the algorithm and gets me noticed. And don't forget, all the links down below. You can see where to buy all the hardware that I featured in today's video, as well as a link to my Amazon shop where you can see a lot of the hardware that I featured in my videos where I've reviewed and tested it against everything else, so you know that everything in that shop is tried and tested and worth your cash. That's it from me today. I'll be back very, very soon with lots of similar content to this and lots more besides. So thanks for watching Crazy Tech Lab today. I'll be back very soon.